Hello there. How are you? Well, my name's Dan, and I have a fragrance review for you. Today, I'm going to be reviewing Vintage Radio by Lataffa. I'm going to let you see this a little bit better. And it's a pretty simple white kind of, it almost looks like porcelain. I'm not sure exactly what material this is. Kind of a white bottle with a little brown radio and a simple bronze cap. Not too crazy of a presentation as far as the clone houses go. Sometimes they can be pretty outlandish, but this one's not too bad. And I've gathered a couple um, perfumers materials here that I have in preparation for this review. So um, let's see how the spray goes. That's a good first step, isn't it? It's actually a pretty good atomizer. Um, Much better than some of the atomizers that you'll occasionally get. And this fragrance just it projects. Even after just spraying those, I haven't even brought this to my face. It just boom fills up the room. So this thing is a projection beast. And because of that, if you don't love the aroma profile of the fragrance, you're not gonna love this one, that's for sure. But transversely, if you do love it, um, you will love the fragrance because the performance on this thing is out of control. It is an absolute projection beast. It pushes and pushes and pushes, and it doesn't stop working for hours and hours and hours. So, um, for the extremely low price of vintage radio, um, it is really an incredible performer. And for those of you who don't know, this is a clone of Initio fragrance, which is sort of one of the spaces that Lataffa has spent quite a bit of time on. And, Initio is a very expensive fragrance house, and Lataffa's not. So, for those of you who are curious on what the value of some of their fragrances are, I'll go through a couple of them and do a couple videos on some of these clones. But if you like plums, you like the smell of plums or the taste of plums, this one is probably going to land pretty well with you. And I guess one of the first questions is how faithful of a representation is vintage radio to Paragon? So I smelled this, I bought this fragrance blind, and I smelled it before I ever smelled Paragon, just because I like plums a lot. So I blind bought it. And I love this fragrance. I was absolutely blown away when I got it. I couldn't believe how good the projection was and how long it lasts. It, like if you spray it on clothes, you will smell it the next day, and it just pushes. That's a very very difficult combination to get down as a perfumer. Typically, the way you can think about projection and lasting power is that they're sort of on opposite ends of the chemical spectrum. So highly volatile chemical materials burn off faster, and that creates a lot of projection. They get out into the air because um, they're burning off of the skin or off of the clothes more quickly out of the fragrance oil. And low volatility will create a lot of lasting power, but not a lot of projection because it's burning off very slowly. And so, for something to have both projection and lasting power is sort of a paradox. It's really a magic trick that the perfumer is playing. And when you get these balances right, it's sort of like, as someone who is a hobbyist perfumer who plays with these materials like this and tries to make a fragrance like that, there are times when I smell a fragrance and I'm just blown away. I don't even understand. I mean, I understand at a technical level how they do it, but it's so impressive to me that people are able to make fragrances like this, which have both tremendous projection and incredible lasting power. It is really a phenomenal skill set. And for something to be this affordable and have both incredible projection and phenomenal lasting power is absolutely mind blowing to me. Um, so, anyway, let's talk about the fragrance in a little bit more detail. So, what comes off of the strip after spraying it is obviously a big blast of plum. But if you've ever smelled Initio's fragrances, you know what you're getting with that is a lot of musk. Initio uses very intense, high quantities of musks, and they're one of the fragrance houses that has a proprietary musk. And I don't remember what the material is called or if they've ever even told anyone. I honestly don't know, but I know that Initio has a proprietary musk that they use in their fragrances that nobody else has. And so the question is, as a clone house, how do you get as close as possible to Initio, given that you will not have access to this material? And so I'll describe some of the ways that I think Lataffa has gone about this. One of the ways that they've gone about this, there are raw materials which have sort of a kind of a thick, creamy, um, I almost want to use the word smoky, but it's not like fire smoke. It's like cloud smoke. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's like cotton candy, bubble gum. Not necessarily the sweet part of those things, but just the creamy, um, almost very, very slightly lactonic. And what I mean by that is like milky, thick, kind of dreamy materials. And they sit up in kind of the upper portion of the fragrance, up in the kind of the top notes or even the heart notes. So they come pretty early on in the fragrance. One of those materials is called guaiacol, which I have here. And guaiacol is, I would say, in the sort of upper middle range of the fragrance aroma profile, which means it's going to come at you fairly early. This is very creamy, pleasant, um, kind of a light-hearted material, a little bit powdery, and it lends this kind of thickness and richness to a fragrance. And I believe that this fragrance probably has either guaiacol or something very similar to it in it. I also think it's pretty likely that it has some coumarin in it, which is a very common fragrance in these kind of things. And this would lend a little bit of sweetness, but it would also lend a little bit of that thickness, more in the bottom kind of middle heart note portion. It's not exactly a base note, but it's probably more like a middle range note, kind of like a middle volatility level. And so these are two spaces where there's some kind of thickness and richness coming to the fragrance. Also a little sweet, also a little bit not exactly like candy, but you get the point. There's this kind of like dreamy, cloudy, sweet. And I think that these materials, when you go into Fragrantica and you look at the reviews, I think that these are the kinds of materials that are causing people to say that it's a little bit feminine because it's sort of powdery and sort of playful and lighthearted and uplifting. And I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a feminine fragrance, but I can understand why somebody who's very sort of masculine leaning might feel that way. Somebody who likes really intense, woodsy, or things like that. To me, this is a man's fragrance pretty clearly, but I could understand it being a little unisex, maybe. Um, and then there's also what feels to me to be possibly something like allyl amyl glycoate. Um, Not a sweet material, but definitely a thickening kind of material in the mid section. And it also has this almost kind of smoky, thick, again, not smoky like a campfire at all, thick, ozonic quality. This one is a little more ozonic, a little more tart, and a little more fresh. It's pretty commonly used in pineapple accords. When people are trying to add a little bit of, the perfume side that's a weird way to say this, but the perfumer's interpretation of a pineapple as opposed to like a photorealistic pineapple, which you would want to use the heptanoate and other I think it's called caproate anyway. It doesn't matter. Materials like that would help you create sort of a more photorealistic fruity pineapple where you can almost like taste the spikes in it and everything, like very, very photorealistic pineapple. This doesn't have any of that. This is a kind of a thick, creamy material almost. And because of how much of that aspect vintage radio has, that kind of thick, cloudy thing that's happening in this fragrance, uh, powdery. I'm inclined to believe that they're using multiple elements like that. And the allylamyl glycolate would also add a little bit of, fruity, realistic support to the plum, which is another compelling reason why they may have used some of that in the fragrance. And then I also kind of get almost like almost an element of green apple from this fragrance, which leads me to believe that possibly they use some manzanate, which has a kind of like a tart, like a sharp tartness. I do get a little bit of that in this as well. It's possibly coming from the manzanate. And that might be the material responsible for why some people are commenting in Fragrantica that there's almost like a rhubarb feeling, because I do get a little bit of that as well in the fragrance. Now, because of the usage of these materials, which are relatively affordable, I think that those are present in part to replace the fact that Lataffa doesn't have access to whatever this proprietary musk is. Although Lataffa may have used a macrocyclic musk like helvetolide, for example, which is um, a musk which sits in the top note, which is fairly uncommon. Most of the time, musks are base notes, or at most, they're kind of heart notes, kind of in the middle of the fragrance. So it is definitely possible that between the use of these kind of powdery, dreamy, cloudy, thick materials and a little bit of helvetolide, for example, or one of those kind of newer macrocyclic musks, which kind of sit in the top range of the fragrance, that they're imitating that. And those are very common materials used in modern perfumery. So it would be no surprise that they would have access to those materials and use them. But that's not all that this fragrance offers. I think that it is pretty clearly a fruity plum bomb, and you know that if you've read anything about this fragrance. But it's also a musk bomb, and it's not exactly clear to me what musks were used. I think it's pretty likely, well, granted, Hedione is not exactly a musk, but typically it's used in kind of a trinity of musks. One of them happens to be ambroxan. There's a decent chance that there's some of that or some cedalox, like I said in my last video in there. Um, but I think it's probably more likely that these were that a lot of the musks that Lataffa has opted to use are sort of clean musks, like galaxolide and tonalide. Tonalide specifically, to me, feels pretty likely. And the reason for that is it gives kind of a fresh laundry sort of scent, which actually pairs really nicely with the plum. Um, People are commenting that the fragrance gives a little bit of like a potpourri vibe. I don't get potpourri, but I could easily see this being used as like a dryer sheet, this fragrance. And I think I'm getting some of that from tonalide, possibly galaxolide, these kinds of white musks, which lend sort of a clean, musky support. And there's probably some other musks in operation here. I think I'm getting some ethylene brassylate for a little bit of this kind of, you know, on the underneath, almost a little bit of a sweet. It's not exactly a sweet material, but I'm not exactly sure how else to describe it to you. But I think these notes are all coming together to form sort of the lasting, clean feeling that I'm getting from this fragrance. And a very inviting and easy to smell fragrance. For me, this is one of the easiest fragrances in the world to wear. I know that some of the reviews say that it has a very synthetic opening, and I understand why they say that because a lot of these materials, they really don't smell like anything natural naturally occurring in the world. But it doesn't mean that they're not absolutely beautiful materials. And I think that perhaps it smells a little bit synthetic, probably because of stuff like manzanate and possibly this allylamyl glycoate, which do have a little bit of a chemically sharpness to them. And as soon as that wears off, I think we're kind of in the clear. And then they subdue into these supporting facets, which actually create the outline of a more realistic plum. So even though there's a slightly synthetic thing going on in the beginning, what it settles into is actually kind of a kind of a beautiful, smooth, creamy, delicious, you know, like plum cheesecake. I'm not sure how else to describe it. It's not exactly a gourmand fragrance, but like they're not loading the sweetness. They're not loading you with um edible ingredients. It's not completely loaded with edible raw materials, but there's a slightly lactonic, creamy, just a little bit lactonic. I mean, very, very slight. Mostly powdery and plum and musk. It's mostly powder, musk, and plum. And if you like the sound of powder, musk, and plum, you really can't go wrong at this price point. I mean, the projection is just ridiculous. It is absolutely insane how strong this thing projects. The lasting power is unbelievable. I'm talking like easily 8 hours, people will smell you, 9 hours, even 10 hours, people will be smelling you still. This thing really never turns into a skin scent. I mean, it's just, I don't know how they did it, to be honest. I really don't know how they did it. I'm flabbergasted by the performance of this product at the price point. It makes no sense. I think this thing projects more than Paragon, and Paragon is a projection bomb too. What I will say is due to the selection of raw materials, which I believe are used to replace that proprietary musk, Paragon does, it is a little bit more masculine. It's a little bit more musk heavy. Initio is a very musk heavy brand in general. And so Paragon does smell more expensive. And so this does come across as a more affordable fragrance. Now, having said that, this fragrance smells more expensive and better blended than some bottles that I have, which costed me $200. So, that's not saying much to me. It's an absolutely phenomenal performer for the price point, for the longevity. I mean, it's unbelievable. It definitely beats the hell out of the majority of designer fragrances out there, which are equally synthetic, and really, priced in that kind of $100 range, $150 range. This will outperform almost all of the designer fragrances out there. So if you like the aroma profile of it, you can't go wrong with Vintage Radio. I mean, this thing is one of my favorite fragrances that I wear on a routine basis. I will run through bottles of this fragrance. I haven't run through bottles of it yet because I haven't had it for that long, but I've had it for a couple months and it is in my rotation and it will always be in my rotation. I'll never let it go dry. Um, and so I'll tell you a funny story before I let you go. So, like I said, I smelled this before I smelled Paragon. I had I had sprayed this that morning, and then I went into Neiman Marcus and I was smelling through Initio fragrances. And so I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but when you've been wearing a fragrance all day, it's hard to smell the fragrance on a strip sometimes. So I sprayed Paragon on a strip and I could smell it because there are differences, but most of what I smelled was the musks. And as I'm smelling it, I'm like, wait, there's some plum going on here. And then I smelled my arm and I was like, oh my God, I knew this smelled familiar. So it's close enough that I was able to recognize it. It's just happened to be the one that I was wearing that day, which is kind of comical. And I had never smelled Paragon, and I actually didn't know that this was a clone of Paragon when I bought it. That's how I discovered that it was a clone of Paragon, because it really confused me when I sprayed Paragon, and I was like, "This just smells so, like, familiar." And I was actually wearing the clone of it. Um, and the person behind the counter said, "Yeah, I thought that's what you were wearing. I thought it was weird when you went to spray it." And so I had to explain to them that there's this clone out there that's, you know, I want to say maybe 85, 90% similar. Like, if you're not if your nose isn't that refined, that sophisticated, after it dries down a little bit, you may not even be able to tell the difference. The main difference is that Paragon is muskier and less powdery, and that's about it. You know, it's also a more realistic plum. I'm sure they used more expensive raw materials at some level, but you'd be surprised. There's only so many ways to make an omelet in the perfume world. So, the reason that these houses can oftentimes get really close is because a lot of these materials are available. You can just go online and buy them. That's why I have them right here. So I'm sure people are doing that, and these Middle Eastern clone houses have access to basically anything that's not proprietary. So they can make very compelling clones, and this happens to be one of them. So would I recommend this fragrance? Absolutely. I think this thing is like a 9 out of 10 for me. It's a love. It's one of my favorites, and you can't beat the price. I mean, it's just insane. So, yeah, if you're curious, if you like plum, if you like kind of fruity fragrances, has supporting floral, and you got to be comfortable with it being a musk bomb, which is very powdery. This fragrance is very powdery, and smoky and thick. The thickness, actually, I think for some people, the thickness of this fragrance might bother them. It's almost kind of overwhelming just how thick it is. Um, and that's a strange way to describe a fragrance or an olfactory aspect, but I don't know how else to do it. It's very thick. It's very thick and misty and kind of dreamy and musky, and yeah, I love it. So that'll be the perfume review of the day, vintage radio from Lataffa. Yeah, go get a bottle if you're curious. It's amazing. Yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Like I promised in the last video, I'm going to do a lot more of these fragrance reviews. So if you're curious about fragrances, if you have any fragrances that you would like me to review, please leave a comment asking. There's a good chance I have it. I have like 100 fragrances. So I would be happy to take requests. If you're curious about more Lataffa fragrances, I have some. So I will be doing more Lataffa reviews, more clone reviews, more authentic designer, and even some niche reviews. So yeah, give me a sub. If you feel so inclined, share the video with your friends and like the video, and talk to me in the comments. I love talking about fragrances. I'm passionate about them. So yeah, we'll chat soon. Thanks so much. Bye bye.